So welcome everyone to our monthly DNR LGU forum here. And I should say I'm C.L. Strauss, I'm the state floodplain manager. And let's see, today we will be talking about native plants and pollinators, emphasis on pollinators. And we've got 3 speakers lined up and looking forward to hearing what they have to say. And Jen with Metro Blooms will be our first speaker, talking about native plantings for pollinators. And Christina, who's our DNR pollinator lead, will be talking about pollinator conservation in Minnesota. And Alyssa with the Carlton SWCD will talk about some of the great work that they're doing in Carlton there. And then depending on how much time we have at the end, we'll have some Slido questions and open it up for more discussion. But I do want to say we want people to feel free to put comments or questions in the chat. Gary Bennett and I will be monitoring the chat. If it's something more time sensitive, we'll jump in and ask our presenters. But otherwise, we'll have a little bit of Q&A at the end of each of our presenters speaking, and then whatever time we've got at the end, we'll use most of that for Q&A, and we'll have a brief update on upcoming trainings and other forum topics. So I am going to invite Jen to present, and I'm seeing your camera, Jen.
Thanks, Seal. Let me share and make sure that's working.
I'm seeing it. Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for inviting Metro Blooms to come speak to you today. I'm excited to be here with you. I'm going to give our native planting for pollinators presentation. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Metro Blooms first, and then I'll kind of give you a intro into what we'll be talking about today. I'm a registered landscape architect. I've been at Metro Blooms for about 12 years. It's hard to remember all those years now. For about 12 years, working in both designing a lot of pollinator plantings, working with residential, commercial, governmental organizations to bring pollinator plantings into some work that they're doing, as well as providing education. So one of the other big roles I play is as a workshop presenter, sort of presenting very similar content that I'm giving to you today to watershed districts as well as residential individual residences, kind of as part of our larger workshop presentations. So happy to answer questions about those as we move forward. I'm going to make sure I know how to forward my slides. There we go. I want to tell you just a little bit about Metro Blooms in case you are not familiar with us. So Metro Blooms is a nonprofit organization. We do a lot of work around native plantings as well as stormwater management. So that's another big portion of the work that we're doing, incorporating those two together. A lot of designs and retrofits to bring those into communities, especially communities that may not have access to those types of resources. So our mission at Metro Blooms is to partner with communities to create resilient landscapes, foster clean watersheds, embracing the values of equity and inclusion to solve our environmental challenges. And Blue Thumb is our educational wing. So Blue Thumb is housed within Metro Blooms. The goal of Blue Thumb is really to connect Minnesotans to resources, many of which I'm going to be sharing with you today, both regarding native plantings, rain gardens, shoreline stabilization, something we're talking a lot about more these days, and providing a lot of resources for folks to be able to implement those types of projects as well. And of course, we all know the state fair is coming. We have a big booth at the state fair right outside the Eco Building underneath the wind turbine blade. So if you're headed to the state fair, come join us and see our booth at the state fair. I work for Metro Blooms Design and Build, and we are a for-profit company, and we are wholly owned by the nonprofit Metro Blooms. Our work is to really provide that technical assistance. So design, installation, and maintenance services for some of Metro Blooms programs, as well as other clients. The presentation that I'm giving to you today is adapted from one of our longer presentations about planting for pollinators that we provide as part of the Lawns to Legumes program through the Board of Water and Soil Resources, as well as through our other larger workshop programs. I've condensed it a bit for our timeline here today, so it goes a little faster. But really the goal of this presentation is trying to make pollinator plantings accessible to most people, how to start thinking about doing that individually, whether that's on single family property or anything larger, and then just kind of how to really walk through those steps of creating pollinator plantings and what are the key features that are really important to make those plantings successful for pollinators, whether it is the location where they're planted or how you maintain it, which is a really big impact on ensuring that pollinators are supported through that planting. So the first thing that we always recommend to anyone who's interested in bringing pollinator plantings into their project, into their residence, this is obviously a single family residential example in the space map here on the right, is just to do a thorough site assessment. This really helps with a few things. Just selecting the right plant for the right place and making sure that that vegetation will be successful is huge and is a really important part of successful native plantings. So checking the sunlight, really understanding whether we're dealing with full sun, part sun to full shade situation, and observing that throughout the season can be very helpful. Soil moisture, as we all know, is really important to selecting the right plant for the right place. And that also is impacted in terms of stormwater flow. So if we're interested in including native plantings in infiltration practice, ensuring that those plants can handle both inundation from stormwater and then being dry in case we really have a dry period, which we don't seem to have this summer. So all of those things are really going into determining the best plantings for a particular location. And then also just existing structures and hardscapes. I will say like 99% of the design work we do is retrofitting pollinator plantings, stormwater features into an existing hardscape site. So really understanding the flow of runoff from those, understanding shade or impact or just usage of the site. Is there need for accessibility, for ensuring visibility throughout the site or for recreation and making sure we're planning accordingly. There are a few key considerations for a pollinator planting that are important no matter the size or scale of that planting. And that's including a diversity of blooming plants across the season. So that means that in April through November, when pollinators have emerged and are active in our area, they're hungry and they need something to eat. So really ensuring that any pollinator planting has blooming species, I would say especially early in the season are some of the times that I think are most critical for our pollinators. Right now you can go walk around and everything is blooming, very active with pollinators, and that's fantastic. But we need to make sure that extending into October and November, we have goldenrod and asters blooming for pollinators to feed on. And then in the early season, we do as well, so that once they emerge, there's really that nectar and food source available for them. And then also including host plants for larvae. So it's not just about the nectar species. So we've got liatris in this image here with a monarch on it. But of course, they need milkweed as a host species for them, as a host plant for their species. So including both nectar and host sources is really going to go a long way to supporting our native pollinators and doing a little in-depth research into what you're trying to support and making sure you have that diversity of plantings within the pollinator kind of design that you have created. That also includes access to nesting sites. I'll be talking about maintenance in a few minutes, just a little later in the presentation, but one of the things that we really talk about are ensuring that we're leaving hollow stems available for pollinators to nest in over winter, clumping grasses for them to be able to nest in as well. So really those access to nesting sites are very important. And I would say low to no chemical input is what's most important for pollinators as well. So we have this beautiful pollinator planting. We're bringing a lot of species of bees and butterflies there to feed on that, not applying herbicide or pesticide anywhere in the area so that they are then not impacted by those chemicals in the area. That's really important as well. Of course, designing native plants is important because those native plants are often very resilient and mostly because of their really deep root systems. I'm sure you all have seen this illustration. I love it. I see this actually in so many places these days. And I love that it's sort of making its way around through a lot of different educational resources. Deep roots are so helpful in making the native plants so resilient. They're really allowing those native plants to tap into water deeper in the soil profile. So in seasons when we do have drought, which if we remember back just to a couple of summers ago, we did have a pretty good drought, native plants are able to really reach those water resources deeper in the soil. Of course, that's really helpful if you're utilizing native plants in any type of stormwater infiltration practice, because those deep root systems are also going to help that runoff water infiltrate deeper into the soil profile, clean that as it goes, and then help really bring that runoff water deeper into the soil profile. So many reasons to plant native plants, not just for a pollinator benefit, and these are just a few of those. Of course, we want to make sure, as I said before, that those plants are successful, so that if you're going to plant native plantings, that they are doing well, that the vegetation comes in strong, is successful every year. And that just includes paying attention to a few things like sun and shade, like I mentioned before, soil moisture, and then also plant height. A lot of our native species do get fairly tall, so making sure that you have space for that, or you pick shorter species in areas where really having something tall would not be appropriate. We'll talk about trees and shrubs, and then we'll talk about some of the design strategies that we use for designing native plantings. One of the things that we are talking a lot about these days are native trees and shrubs for a few different reasons. They can be, for one reason, lower maintenance. When we think of our prairie plantings with a lot of perennial species of grasses and forbs, they're beautiful. They do require some care, especially because they can be certainly overtaken by invasive species if we're not really careful during that establishment period. One of the benefits of trees and shrubs, especially in situations where we know that the site may not get a ton of maintenance, there's really no capacity or no funding for maintenance, is really trying to incorporate trees and shrubs into those areas. And that can be in commercial, larger restoration projects, or even smaller single-family residential situations. Not only are they lower maintenance, but they're providing so many different benefits. So they really are often some of our really early bloomers. So they're really providing that early forage for pollinators in the spring. Tree flowers are often very small, so we're not really paying attention to them, but that's what our early season pollinators who emerge are often attracted to. And so those tree resources are really, really valuable. They are a host site for many of our native Lepidoptera, so it's another reason to consider planting more trees and shrubs, especially our native ones that bloom early. They're also providing so many other ecosystem services. So they're providing just structure in the landscape. They're providing early shade. So when we have a really warm summer, they're providing shade for cooling of buildings, wind screens. They soak up a lot of rainwater runoff. So there's a lot of ecosystem services provided by trees, as well as shrubs that can really be incorporated into pollinator plantings in a way that is both beautiful and lower maintenance to help those plantings be successful, not just for humans in terms of how we're viewing and maintaining the landscape, but also for pollinators as well.
Could you say what Lepidoptera are?
Oh, so like our native moth species.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so just to kind of jump back for a second to talk a little bit about designing with native plants. So my background is as a landscape architect. So when I first started doing this, I was really interested in just the design aspect. So I wanted to provide ecological benefit to the designs that I was doing, but I like designing things that look nice. And so that was a big part of what I do as well. So it's been really fun for me to talk about ways to design with native plants that are not only beneficial for pollinators, but really beautiful for us to look at as well. So there's a couple of different styles that we'll go through. And I think that in talking about pollinator plantings in this way, those of us in the realm of really trying to improve ecological resources, in talking about designing native plants, it really makes it a lot more appealing to people who are maybe just starting to get into native plants as part of their landscape. I once had a resident say, well, I've got my landscaping over here, and then I have my native plants over here. And my view is it should all be the same, right? We can landscape with native plants. We can have native plants be our foundation plantings around homes. We can have native plants be in our boulevards. So it doesn't have to be separated. And part of the way to do that is to really think about how we're designing with those native plants. Now, I'm going to go through just a couple of very basic ways to design with native plants that really touch on some of the planting design foundations. within that field. So really, plant massing is the first. This can be very accessible, especially to anyone who is not familiar with these native plants. If they are planted in clumps of 3, 5, or even 7 in a residential setting, that can help a resident who maybe the next year sees plants coming up and they're thinking, I really am not sure if this is what I planted or if this is a weed. You can see everything's in a pattern, and this one odd one out is likely a weed. So it really helps to identify those plants during maintenance. And I love utilizing the plant identification apps that are available to us now, and I find that that's very helpful from anyone who is a maintenance professional to a resident to myself. If there's a plant I can't identify, there's a couple of apps that are actually doing a really good job with that as well. And then also this plant massing provides larger groupings of blooms that are available to pollinators, providing forage throughout the season. And this is what's really important, is you can't forget to plant diverse species. So while you might have a big mass of wild bergamot, which you can see in the picture on the bottom right, we need to make sure that there's also something blooming in the spring and then blooming in the late fall to provide pollinator forage in that area. So having a little diversity throughout the growing season. Another way to do this is with shady sites. So we have a number of folks who will say, well, I have a lot of shade, I really can't plant a lot of native plants. Well, lucky for us, there are a lot of really wonderful native shade species in Minnesota. And I would say they may not be as showy, but they add a lot of leaf texture and leaf shape and color, and they can be very, very beautiful. Our shade gardens tend to have their moment in the sun in the spring. So a lot of these plants were evolved to bloom before trees started leafing out. So shade gardens can often have more blooming species in the early spring. That could be bloodroot from the picture on the very left to wild geranium, which is blooming on the picture on the right. But then one of the benefits is there are a few shade species that actually can continue to provide blooms throughout the season, such as zigzag goldenrod, big-leaved aster, heart-leaved aster, are all wonderful species that bloom in the fall. So we can really try to provide that bloom all season long in a shade garden as well. So there's a lot of options that are available in shady gardens as well. The other planting style, which I'm really enjoying utilizing these days, is matrix planting. This can be really helpful in much larger planted areas. There's a few reasons. So the goal of a matrix planting is you really have grasses and sedges that are forming the basis of this design. So in this particular picture on the right, there's box sedge as well as prairie dropseed, and they are planted in a grid all throughout this is a very large boulevard in Minneapolis. And they can be very helpful. They grow very quickly. They tend to cover the soil. So if there's a lot of weed pressure in the area, which in all boulevards, they are difficult growing environments, there's often a lot of weed seeds and a lot of weed pressure. So the prairie dropseed and the sedge, in this case, do a really good job of covering the soil and maybe out-competing and elbowing out some of those weeds that would otherwise become very difficult and problematic in a planting like this. The sedges green up really early in the spring. They can handle a little bit more wetter soil, and then often the grasses are going to be really the late season grasses that do well in the drier areas. So that diversity helps you have a few different species that can do well over the planting area. And then that whole grid is interspersed with flowering native plants. So in this case, there's some penstemon, there's some pale purple coneflower, there's butterfly weed, all that bloom throughout the season. There's asters in there that'll bloom later. And so the goal is you're providing those flowering resources, but you're also really doing a good job of covering the soil and helping to make this easier to maintain later. I think this is very successful in much larger plantings. And we are utilizing that, and it's working really well. It's also really helpful in stormwater infiltration practices because the sedges really can hold the soil. If you have a rain garden that is getting pretty large inundation and you want to make sure the soil is stabilized, those really fibrous root systems of the sedges do an excellent job at that. In order to make these types of plantings accessible to everyone, these are a few planting templates that we developed for the Lawns to Legumes program through the Board of Water and Soil Resources. And they're available to everyone. And I'll, at the end of this presentation, sort of show you where those are available or kind of tell you a little bit more about that. But those are available on our Blue Thumb website. So bluethumb.org on our resources tab. And the wonderful thing about these is that they provide bloom throughout the season. They show residents or anyone who's utilizing a planting like this how to implement it, which species to pick. And then on the reverse side, which we're not showing here at this slide, is different options. So for replacing columbine in the template on the right, there'll be 3 or 4 different options if for some reason you can't get columbine or you want a substitution. So they're really accessible for folks throughout the state to utilize when putting in pollinator focused plantings. This is just a brief slide on installation. Again, this is geared towards a smaller kind of pocket planting in a residential site. But one of the resources we try to provide are just different ways that folks can install a native planting. If you don't have the physical capacity to remove turf, for example, with a sod kicker, like these young, strong people in this photo are doing here, then there's so many different ways. That could be through sheet mulching, solarization, so many different ways to kind of prepare your site for a native planting. And I will say this presentation is focused mostly on native plantings of plugs or small plants. We don't do a lot of large seeding projects. And of course, that is another way to begin native plantings. We find in smaller sites that using plugs or small plants is much more successful. We do recommend mulching bare soil with some type of double shredded hardwood mulch. We want to make sure the soil is protected, that it's holding in moisture for the new plants to be able to survive. That mulch does a little bit to help prevent some weed growth or kind of hold it at bay while the new plants are getting established. It doesn't usually need a lot of remulching. That's not something we're advocating, but just that initial layer of mulch can help protect the soil, also protect it from erosion in a heavy rain event. And then I think one of the most important things to talk about are just ways that we care for our landscapes and how that can really help benefit pollinators, and changing some of those practices can be extremely beneficial to the success of pollinators. One of the things that we recommend is to not clean up your garden in the fall. It's okay to let those plants stand in the winter. The duff, the above ground portion of the plants that'll die back, they are providing seeds for birds. They're providing nesting sites for pollinators. And fall is a beautiful time in Minnesota where I say, like, just go for a hike. Don't spend your weekends cleaning up your yard. Let it be a little messy in the fall, and that's okay. Being okay with some messiness is one of the things that I think as a culture, we could do a lot better job at to promote pollinators. We don't recommend that folks really clean up their garden until the spring. Our sort of rule of thumb is to wait until the average temperature is about 50 degrees. One way you can tell that is when dandelions begin to bloom. That's just in your area. That's a cue that soil has warmed up enough. And then, of course, avoiding chemical input, avoiding fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. And you can always create a small, shallow water source for pollinators as well. One of the reasons that we don't recommend hauling away all those leaves in the fall is that they really can be providing nesting sites for a lot of our pollinators. So I really appreciate this graphic. There's a group called Pollinator Friendly Yards that talk about kind of what's being sent away when we rake up all those leaves and bag them. And you can see you're really taking away cocoons for a lot of our native moth species and fireflies. So you don't have to leave the leaves on your driveway or on your car. That may not be the place, but if they fall in your garden, great, let them stay there so that they can be providing those nesting sites. When you do cut plants back in the spring, don't cut them back to the ground. Maybe leave 18 inches standing so that those hollow stems can be providing nesting sites as well. And just one more slide, and then I'll end. I think I might be a few minutes over time. One of the questions that we were asked about to present about was just how communities can support plantings for pollinators. I would say there's a lot of resources on the Lawns to Legumes websites and on our Blue Thumb website. We help administer the residential portion of that program for the state of Minnesota. anyone living in Minnesota can apply to that program. And that grant also helps to make it accessible for so many people. A lot of these images were taken from Lawns to Legumes grant recipients over the past few years. I'd say another resource is that we work with a couple of watershed districts who require the use of native plantings in both their runoff reduction and native habitat grant programs. So really having grant programs support the use of native plants is another great way to help make sure that that's being implemented in our areas. And then also something that's come up for us recently, excuse me, it's just really ordinances that support the use of native plantings. I kind of touched on earlier kind of the aesthetic differences that might occur between landscaping and native plantings, and making sure that ordinances are supporting the use of native plants and not having to keep things too neat and clean. And then just sharing resources. bluethumb.org, this is the website of our educational wing, and where so many of these resources can be found. This is what that resources page looks like at the top right, Blue Thumb resources, and then we have everything from planting templates, native plant nursery lists, plant finder tools, step-by-step guides, and this is a great resource for anyone who's interested in putting in pollinator plantings in our area. That's it.
Hey, Jen, one of the questions that was in the chat was about example ordinances, local ordinances that help with installations of native landscapes. Chris mentioned we've allowed natural native landscapes for a number of years, but they tend to generate complaints from neighbors that see anything but standard turf, grasses, weeds. Is there a model ordinance that may be available for jurisdictions regarding installation of a native landscape, i.e. prairie, in a single-family residential setting? For those of us not super familiar with the process of establishing a native landscape or not very good at plant ID, this would be really helpful. And I know I'd be really interested if you can think of any, or other speakers can think of any good examples.
Yeah, I would have to ask our educational team because they're going to be a lot more familiar with the ordinances specifically, but I'd be happy to follow up with them and try to find some additional information from them that we could then forward on. I would say the biggest challenge that often comes up around this is around turf, just like you were mentioning. So there has been a lot more like bee lawns that might include flowering species in turf. One of the things that, and I have had a couple of calls this year where I've needed to kind of check with a resident, they maybe received a complaint about their yard. And it's really educating whomever has that as well. So in one of the cases, the person did have a number of invasives in their yard and they didn't realize it. And so we went out there, helped them identify that, really encouraged the use of some of the plant ID apps. Picture This is the one that I think is the most accurate. I don't think the Google Photos or Google Lens does a very good job of plant identification, but Picture This does an excellent job of plant identification. And so it really helped them understand how to maintain their yard in a way that makes sure that they were eliminating those invasive species. I also really encourage signage. So putting in, this is a native planting sign or something about a bee-friendly yard. And I think that can be really helpful in kind of letting neighbors know what's going on. And then I'd say around turf, specifically, it's the kind of bee lawns or flowering lawns that I think are causing the most complaints with neighbors, as you mentioned before. So some of that is making sure you are still maintaining that bee lawn. And it's important for anyone who has something like that not to just think, oh, it's native, I can just let it go. Because I mean, we have a lot of sweet clover and crown vetch and other invasives in our area, and those will make their way in and you have to continue to maintain it. So we talk about maintenance a lot. So those are two kind of issues that have come up. I would say more about the turf as opposed to just the prairie plantings. I appreciate how I think as a culture, a lot of people are very interested in supporting those pollinators, and that signage seems to be really, really helpful in those cases. And I'm happy to follow up about ordinances and see if I can get you more information about that as well.
Great. Yeah, definitely. I could be sharing that with our local officials if we get some examples. And if anybody who's listening knows they have a good good ordinance or a start of a good ordinance or know of any, please put comments in the chat.
Great. Okay. Pollinator conservation in Minnesota. I was so glad to start with Jen's talk about specifics on planting and garden plans and all that kind of stuff, because my perspective is quite different. I'm kind of at a bird's eye view here in a statewide position at the Department of Natural Resources. I'm the Pollinator Conservation Coordinator at the DNR, and I do get a lot of questions about specifics for gardens and things like that. But I also work at a policy level, and I'll start my talk more on that level. So I just wanted to start by saying that we have so many groups working on pollinator projects in Minnesota and in the country as a whole now. I started working with pollinators back in 2005 as an unpaid intern during the summer. And the kind of attention that pollinators have gotten since then has been amazing. We started with just caring about honeybees because colony collapse disorder came on the scene around 2005, 2006, and since then have expanded kind of like the public consciousness of what pollinators are and why they're important, so much more so since then. So I'm going to give an overview of what my view of pollinator conservation coordination from the perspective mostly of DNR. And I bin them into four main categories of what things that my job covers. So we have cross-agency collaboration, we have internal DNR policies, habitat projects, and research. And I'm not personally involved in some of these things, but I am truly a coordinator. I have a coordinator position. I connect people with other people doing similar work. I connect people with funding. I try to find information for people. That's kind of my role. Okay, so cross-agency collaboration. I want to let everybody know that in Minnesota, we have an interagency pollinator protection team, and that was established by executive order. Back in 2016 was the first executive order from Governor Dayton, and then it was updated in 2019 by Governor Walz, and that establishes this interagency pollinator protection team and kind of gives us our role. And so 10 agencies are represented on that group, everybody from agriculture to health to education to the DNR, and that is coordinated by the Environmental Quality Board. And we come out with a pollinator report every year, and we have developed an action framework that has a lot of the kind of projects we are working on in the state. I am also the Minnesota representative on the group that coordinates the Mid-America Monarch Conservation Strategy, and then updates that conservation strategy every 5 years. And that group has since the listing of the monarch as federally threatened, we've kind of shifted our focus to more of pollinators in general. But so I just wanted to make the point that there are kind of levels and levels of groups here at local level, state level, regional level, and national level. And there's a pollinator focused at each level. And I kind of work amongst those groups. Internal DNR policies is definitely within my realm. This is maybe what I spend the most of my time doing. This part of my job is directed by statute. There's a statute called Pollinator Habitat Program, and it says that the DNR has to have pollinator best management practices that have to be used on all of our lands, including prairie restorations and reconstructions. So I am in the middle of updating this document right now, the Pollinator Best Management Practices and Habitat Restoration Guidelines, and getting feedback on that from our internal land managers at DNR. Habitat projects. This is like the meat of the thing, right? We want more habitat out there benefiting the species. I just wanted to give an overview of all the funding sources that go into funding pollinator projects. And some of them are not directly, their mission is not directly for pollinators, but benefit pollinators nonetheless. So like the wildlife and sport fish restoration logo I have up here, that's Pittman Robertson and Dingle Johnson money. That is the federal tax comes from the federal tax on ammunitions and firearm sales and angling equipment and archery equipment. And that money can go to bird and mammal wildlife projects. But turns out same things that benefit grassland birds also benefit pollinators. So even though that money is not specifically for pollinators, it does benefit pollinator habitat. Same thing with the USDA Farm Service Agency, like Farm Bill funding that goes towards Conservation Reserve Program and other programs that do end up benefiting pollinators. We have the Minnesota Wildlife Action Plan that is being revised right now. We'll have a new one out very soon. Having that plan in place unlocks federal funding that is specifically for at-risk species. So these are the more rare species, declining species, species of greatest conservation need, we call them. And then we have some wonderful state-specific funding sources that other states just don't have. Minnesota has been really great about approving tax increases, or not increases, but tax diversions and lottery money and constitutional amendments that give funding specifically for conservation projects. And these are probably the ones that I work with the most. And I'll give an example of an Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund project that I am working on currently. It ends in October, actually. It's been a 3-year project. And the ENRTF, that's the same fund that goes through the legislative, the LCCMR. I can't see my notes right now, so I can't tell you what that stands for. But the LCCMR projects, you have to apply for, to this council, and they rank the proposals and fund projects based on the rankings. And this was a project that I inherited when I started my job. It's been really fun to work on. The focus of this has been to propagate early blooming native prairie plants. So as Jen mentioned multiple times, we are often missing those early blooming species that are so important for pollinators. And even in large land management contexts, like the DNR does these large scale restorations, our seed mixes are often missing these early blooming species. Because they're missed by mechanical harvesting methods. They're really picky plants. Sometimes they're ephemeral and they're only out for a short amount of time. Sometimes they have really delicious fruits, like ground plum. It gets eaten right up by the critters. We don't get the seed collected. Sometimes they're just really low growing plants that we miss. So in any case, they're hard to collect the seed from. So this project has been to specifically go out there early season, get the seeds, propagate the plants in nursery, and then plant the little baby plants into prairie restorations with a specific focus on, this is prairie violet in the middle here, which is a host plant for regal fritillary butterflies. So we have some specialist species that rely on certain plants that we're trying to get covered here too. I wanted to point to the Board of Water and Soil Resources, also known as BWSR, has a wonderful website. If you Google BWSR Pollinator Toolbox, this will come up. It has pretty much covers all the bases. I wanted to direct you to the that first kind of money logo on their website. It's labeled Identifying Programs and Funding because it's a great place to look at a list of programs available for finding funding for habitat projects. Research is maybe the thing that's most missing from my position description, but I do try to involve myself and invite myself along on surveys because it's really fun. The Minnesota Biological Survey is a unit within the DNR, and they have spent, oh gosh, the last 10 years almost, or more, I guess 2014 on that screenshot I have, surveying bees in particular across the state, looking at historical records of where bee records have been, and then doing current surveys to see where bees are now, and finding that we have over 500 species of bees that make Minnesota their home. So that was a huge effort, and it's still ongoing. They're finding new species every year, even though this the survey was this report was just completed in 2023. We have new species that need to be the survey needs to be updated already. So they just don't. The Minnesota Biological Survey doesn't just focus on bees. They do surveys of all kinds of critters, but the focus on pollinators has definitely increased. And outreach. I do a lot of outreach activities. I go to the state fair every year. August 28th will be there if anybody's in the planning to be there that day. We have Pollinator Day at the state fair. I go to the Minneapolis Monarch Festival every year. That's a huge event, and a bunch of other ones too. And we give out seed packets. A few years ago, the Environmental Quality Board worked to get this state of Minnesota branded seed packet created with all native species that work most places, or should work all places in the state of Minnesota, because we do go to these events where people are coming from all over the state. And so it was really important that we had a mix of species that worked anywhere in the state. So we give those out. People love them. And that's a really fun part of my job. Okay, I'm going to back up about 10 steps because we never talked about what is a pollinator. And I just wanted, there's some finer points of this conversation I'd like to highlight that sometimes get skipped in conversations of pollinators. So what is a pollinator? Pollinators aid plant reproduction by moving pollen from flower to flower. And you look up a diagram of a flower online to figure out what the parts are labeled or named, you will always find a lily. This is not a native species, but I'm going to also use a lily because the parts are just so visible. So really we're talking about the pollen transfer from the anther to the stigma, that sticky stigma. And some plants can self-pollinate, so you only need to get the pollen from the anther to the stigma on the same flower. A lot of them do not self-pollinate. You need to get that pollen from the anthers of one flower to the stigma of another flower. So many flowering plants need help from animal pollinators to set seed or produce fruit, while others rely on wind, water, or gravity. And I just want to go back here, and in that picture, that big green thing is actually a giant model of a flower, and it's got anthers sticking out the side with pollen ping pong balls stuck to the anthers with Velcro. So that model is extremely popular whenever we go present places to demonstrate how pollination works. Even people who thought they knew were like, wow, I never really thought about the actual steps of how that works. So 85% or more than 85% of flowering plants are dependent on animal pollination. And when we talk about pollinators, I like to say pollinator is a political term because what counts as a pollinator is not based on biology so much as it's based on which critters we like and which ones we don't. So most animal pollinators are insects, but particularly bees are what we talk about when we talk about really good pollinators. And that's because bees are perfectly designed to collect pollen for their young. So they have structures on their bodies specially designed to carry pollen because they are taking that pollen home to a nest to feed to their young. Most other critters do not do that. They might be eating the pollen. I'm going to skip ahead. So hummingbirds and many types of insects eat nectar or pollen and may transfer pollen among flowers as they forage, but they may not. That's not their goal, right? Their goal is to get a snack. Hummingbirds, there to get some nectar. Butterflies, there to get some nectar. And I will tell you that biologists get crabby at me sometimes when we count butterflies as pollinators because they're not that great at pollinating. They've got this long tongue that doesn't really collect pollen, and then they, kind of leave. But there's a reason that we count butterflies as pollinators, right? And not like mosquitoes, which do some pollinating, and like thrips species. Some of them do some pollinating, and that's because they're these wonderful flagship species that people really love, and lots of them are declining, so we care a lot about them. Okay, now honeybees. Honeybees live in colonies that can be moved to farm fields and used for crop pollination. managed honeybees are considered non-native livestock in the US. So same as pigs, same as chickens, same as cattle. Honeybees we are not worried about as a species. We are worried about declines in honeybees for other reasons, like the livelihood of beekeepers and them as an indicator species of something is wrong in the environment, that they are that we have colony losses over what we would expect, but we are not worried about them as a species in decline. They are not in decline. Those species we have here in the US is the European honeybee, which was brought to the US for their wax making capabilities for candles back in colonial times. So when I'm talking about bees, I'm always talking about the native species. We have so many wonderful native species, and we also are talking about habitat that benefits all pollinator species, right? Okay, so I'm gonna go through this quickly because we already got a wonderful overview from Jen about what is pollinator habitat. We're talking about not just the flowers, but the nesting habitat as well. To make the point that having these things is great, and we can benefit a lot of species just by having blooming plants that grow throughout the season and having that nesting habitat available. There are species that are picky and need certain plants blooming at certain times. And so this is the reason why we need to maximize diversity of the flowers and maximize the amount of time that we're having blooming plants in bloom, is because these different species of pollinators are emerging at different times of the season. So most of our bees are solitary nesters. That means we have one female bee digging a little hole or finding a hollow stem or wherever they're nesting, gathering nectar and pollen, putting that in the nest, and laying an egg, and sealing that up. And then the larvae hatches and eats that pollen, develops into a pupa, and then emerges. And some species only emerge as adults for a very, very short time. And that could be in early spring, that could be in middle of summer, could be late summer. So whenever that bee is emerging, it needs to have that those flowers available. And some bee species, for example, only collect pollen from one certain type of plant. So when we're talking about habitat, we're talking about blooming plants from spring to fall, but we're also talking about specialist host plants, like Jen mentioned already. So not just for larvae, but also specialist bees. We have these great handouts now on our DNR website for some showing some examples of specialist bees in Minnesota and the plants that they rely on. Some examples: lead plant, spring beauties, willows, monarda. I'm going to skip through this because we already got that big. You understand the roots and why it's important that we have native perennials, because they grow these wonderful root structures, store carbon underground, and they have so much more biomass underground than they do above ground. It's really fascinating and wonderful. But I also want to talk about why not ornamentals and cultivars, which some ornamentals they're not harmful to have, but they're not necessarily beneficial to native species. They didn't co-evolve with native species. They could be a little bit slightly off for different reasons. They might not have any pollen at all because they were bred for having lots of petals, for example. So this dahlia on the left, a bee can't even find the center of that flower. There are some dahlias that do have an open center, and bees might be able to find that. But the flowers might be inaccessible because they're bred for so many petals. The flowers might have a novel color, like this coneflower in the middle. Native coneflowers are not red. Bees cannot see red, so who knows if bees are even going to visit that. And then on the worst case, we have invasive species like this honeysuckle on the right that are highly invasive in our natural areas. And so it runs the gamut from pretty but like not very useful to like actually very harmful for native communities. So, and across the board, we just don't know about the pollen quantity or quality, or what nectar is available to some of these ornamental species because they were bred. they don't resemble necessarily the wild type plants anymore. So native plants, where to start. I love these resources from the DNR. If we're talking about shorelines, a lot of these handouts, I will say though, they don't have the scientific names for the species, which is fine. I understand there's a space issue. Okay, we don't always have the space to put the scientific name, but it's really, really important to do a little bit of research to get the right plants. And I want to give a shout out to MinnesotaWildflowers.info. This is a wonderful, wonderful resource. It's not part of the DNR. We have our own Min-Taxa native plant list, but they're not as easy to use as Minnesota Wildflowers. So we use this a lot. Here is so Spirea. We have a couple native ones. You can also get a whole lot of non-native ones. So it's important to look up what the scientific name is. You can use this website, look at the origin, make sure it's native, and then write those names down. And then I love this resource too. It's native plant suppliers. If you go to the DNR website and search for native plant suppliers, this page will come up. There's different lists for different regions of the state, but that's a good place to start for where to buy. If you don't have local options, or if you don't know of an option for where you can guarantee that they have native plants, this is a good place to start. So take your list of scientific names, find vendors that use the scientific names to match your list. A lot of times they will, if you give them a list, they'll come back and say, oh, we don't have this and this and this, but we do have these as substitutions. Be wary of those substitutions. You have to do the same process, make sure they're native, just like you did with your original list. And then avoid any cutesy or trademark names or signs of hybridization, like an X in the name, or like the word variety or hybrid. I put some examples here. All of these are native genera. The genus name is native. Echinacea, Monarda, Heuchera, and Linicera there's all native species that have that name, but these are not the native versions, right? The native wild type versions of that plant. They've got some real cutesy names, or they've got the X there. That means it's a hybrid. Okay, thank you. I had the two parts of that, policy focused, and then more like things I need people to know about buying native plants that I think can be very confusing, myself included, when I'm looking for plants for my garden. So any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love to connect people to resources any way I can. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Christina. That was a very nice mesh with what Jen had presented. You guys really complemented each other's presentations nicely. And I definitely was writing down things that were new to me. So appreciate that. We'll stick around if there's questions at the very end. Okay, so let's get Alyssa set up here.
Hey, everybody. Okay, well, I am really excited to share what we're doing here at Carlton Soil and Water. Alyssa Bloss, District Manager at the Carlton Soil and Water Conservation District. Just really fun listening to Jen and Christine, all the great stuff you're doing. I think I've got some of repetitive information here too, but also just kind of wrapping it all up to showcase the programs that we're offering landowners and the community, and just the region, these pollinator programs that we offer and help fund. So yeah, just really excited to be here. Conservation specialist at heart. My whole professional career has been working for a soil and water conservation district. I've worked, and so that's going on about 15 years now. So just love what I do. And yeah, we are a pollinator powerhouse here up at Carlton. So I have to share with you just our awesome crew here. We've got 10 folks here on staff, and they range from ag technicians to water resource technicians to conservation specialists, forestry. And this is actually a picture at our annual native plant kit and seed mix sale that we just held in June. I'll pre-order and I'll talk about that a little bit, but we were actually, again, one of the biggest sale in Minnesota through MNL's Native Habitat Partnership Program. But just, we've got a great crew here. We're a second family, and it's just such a great place to work. And for folks that don't know where Carlton is, we're kind of the gateway to Jay Cook State Park, about 20 minutes south and west of Duluth. So beautiful, beautiful place. All right, so I know that there's a lot of folks here that I'm aware that folks are here from counties, and I just think it's really important, if you don't know what a district is, that you do, because counties and really any kind of organization in Minnesota can partner with a district in some way, whether it's through ordinances, developing outreach strategies, through funding opportunities, just improving our communities and natural resources in general. So we are, just a quick background, we are a local government unit that is governed by local leaders. So we're technically a branch off of the state. We're not federal, we're not county, but we're kind of our own little group that is managed by a board of 5 members that represent different parts of the county. And we kind of just do our own thing. Every county in Minnesota, I believe, except for, I think it's Hennepin, has the SWCD, Soil Water Conservation District. There are also in the cities area, there's lots of WMOs, or watershed management organizations too, that can partner with districts to get more money on the ground to help fund conservation projects and staff. We just really are that boots on the ground conservation organization that is really your next door neighbor that can help address resource concerns, help landowners, cities, schools, implement best management practices, or BMPs, to help improve our soil, our water, address erosion, you name it, forestry, invasive species, pollinator projects. Yeah, we're just that boots on the ground organization, and every day is a different day. Lots of really great projects that we do. I did want to point out that, so we do education, outreach, targeted mailings, all kinds of really awesome stuff. So we do receive funds from many different sources. We are primarily grant funded, but also in this day and age, we are okay with funding. We are, and this is probably good for a lot of you folks to know if you don't know already, we have what's called these watershed-based implementation funds, so WBIF, One Watershed, One Plan funds, that we have received through Clean Water, the Clean Water Funds, Clean Water, Land and Legacy. They have voted to give about $90 million to districts throughout the state to help implement these One Watershed, One Plans. And every watershed in Minnesota either has a plan during implementation phase or has been completed. These funds help fund staff time, help fund projects, and help fund outreach materials, help fund tours. But it's great. It's a really great resource. That's kind of our primary funding source here at our district. We also do get some funds from the county. Not every district has a partnership with the county. We have an excellent one. We actually just received a Habitat Enhancement Landscape Program grant through Bowser, Board of Water and Soil Resources, to partner with Carlton County to convert 8.2 acres of managed turf to pollinator habitat. And that ranges from 5-acre pollinator meadow at a local park to just individual pollinator pockets, which we'll talk about later, to manage lawn to these pollinator pockets at public facing, highly used areas. We also do get some federal grants, always looking for other grants. Right now, we actually just applied for a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, LAMP program, landscape something program, acronyms, to do invasive species work with our partners across the Arrowhead region. We help folks do wetland restorations, prescribed grazing, buffer strips, rain gardens, pollinator meadows, forestry stewardship plans, forestry practices, cover crops, invasive species removal. This is a pile of parsnip, shoreline restorations, plus so much more. We call these best management practices, but really anything that you can do to help your natural resources, we're going to help you figure out a way to address your goals, your concerns, and help get your project on the ground. But I was asked to come today to talk to you folks about our pollinator programs, and then later on specifically how that relates to shorelines. And because we're doing a lot of work around our impaired waters and have a really great partnership with our county in supporting them through their ordinances. So back in 2020, you folks might have remembered, and I think Jen might have mentioned this, Bowser, Board of Water and Soil Resources, so Bowser came out with the Lawns to Legumes program. And this is a pilot program put out by the state, which was nationally recognized to help convert small scale areas on a residential lawn to pollinator habitat. So managed spaces. And we received the grant in partnership with SWCD and Oldenburg Arts and Cultural Community, along with other excellent conservation partners. And this program just went wild, and we ran out of funding, and we've had to apply for more. And what we've been able to do is implement our own pollinator program into our district, where we can use different grant funds. So these watershed funds, other grant funds, lots of legumes funds, if we get them, to help landowners implement rain gardens, pollinator pockets, shoreline buffers, bee lawns. And these practices will help. We'll do a site visit, we'll help do a design, and then we'll also help fund up to $500 for these small scale projects, which sometimes can cover all the costs of planting supplies, the plants. We don't necessarily help cost share on labor with this program, but this is just really taken off, and it's been really exciting to see lots of yards converted to these small scale pollinator projects. A little bit of this is going to be redundant. It's been talked about in the last presentations, but we really like to use native plants for our best management practices because we know that they can withstand Mother Nature. Flora, fauna has co-evolved with them, and they just do really great at adapting to our local conditions, resisting disease and pests, provide shelter, food for all kinds of different flora and fauna. They do well in sand, clay, wet, dry, you name it. And up here in the north, there's clay, there's sand, there's muck, there's all kinds of different soils going on up here. So we really want to use native plants. Diversity blooms all season, and then these deep root systems. This was touched on earlier. I've got a graphic that I love to show though that I'll share here in a little bit. We don't want to use non-native plantings for some of the reasons mentioned in previous presentations. A lot of them are high maintenance, so we really try to promote low maintenance. There is some maintenance with these plantings, but they're high maintenance. But a lot of these non-native plantings are high maintenance, such as your lawn. Some of them need insecticides. They provide shelter and food for non-native pests, non-native species. A lot of them are considered weedy. They do well in disturbed soils. A lot of them are one color, short-lived, or have shallow root systems. So examples are butterfly milkweed, smooth blue aster. The asters are going wild right now, if you don't know that. Really great pollinator powerhouse for insects. Indian grass, black-eyed Susan, wild bergamot, I think it's kind of called a warrior plant in my world. It does well, almost too well in some areas. Side-oats grama, purple prairie clover, one of my faves. It actually puts nitrogen back in the soil. My daughter's actually named after this plant. Smells super good. Little blue stem and purple coneflower. And I just love showing this graphic to landowners when we do site visits because you can see how deep these root systems are. They can go up to 15 feet deep and actually bust through that soil, bust through that clay layer, and just really help infiltrate stormwater runoff in these urban settings. So another reason why we want to use these native plants in rain gardens to help infiltrate pollutants, help infiltrate that runoff before it reaches our groundwater table, really cleaning that up and holding the soil in place. These roots also create a really great little ecosystem for all the fauna and all the good things happening down in the soil. So these roots are just excellent. And then also for shoreline restorations, holding that soil in place, holding that shoreline in place where you're not losing your property that you're essentially paying taxes on. You're keeping that shoreline. And this is your Kentucky bluegrass, your long grass. Essentially, it's green impervious surface. The water tends to run right off of that. And it doesn't do much for the infiltrating of pollutants because the root systems are so deep. It doesn't allow for that water to percolate through the soil really nice. And then the above ground vegetation really helps slow down that runoff, really helps slow down that water, whatever it could be contaminated with, polluted with, and to allow the roots to help infiltrate that water. Also really nice to look at, aesthetically pleasing, providing habitat, nesting, resting for our pollinators and beneficial insects, which was covered in previous slides. So yeah, I just love showing folks this graphic. And we actually have one that shows one of a shoreline too, showing those different roots and how that looks along the shoreline, which is really fun to show folks. When we do site visits, we actually have a big packet of information that I've created throughout the years that shows information on rain gardens, shorelines, pollinator practices, things like that. So again, this is kind of a review of benefits of native plants. Pollinators are keystone species. And these native plantings help benefit these pollinators, which are so important. So bees, bats, hummingbirds, monarch butterflies. And you can see there's all these different connections happening. 1 in 3 mouthfuls of food and drink require a pollinator. And over 85% of our plants in the world, of our 352,000 plants, depend on insects for pollination. So it's really easy to, I mean, it's pretty easy to help pollinators in your own backyard. Just plant some native plants. These small scale pollinator plantings have been proven to work to create these corridors, to create these really important pathways for insects and beneficials and pollinators to access different food sources, different areas. So just a small little planting can do so much. Creating diversity of blooms spring through fall, so making sure that there's something blooming spring, summer, fall. So there's that food source, nesting habitat, but also something nice for us to look at. So it's a good way to sell these projects too. Protecting nests and egg laying sites, leaving overwintering habitat, and then just don't use pesticides. So here's some examples of these small scale pollinator projects, and then I'll go further into shoreline projects that we're working on. But a rain garden is essentially this is one of our most popular ones that we help landowners with. It's essentially a shallow depression, 9 to 12 inches deep, that can drain within 48 hours. So it's not a mosquito nesting ground. Sometimes soil amendments may be needed. So putting in some compost, usually about 3 inches of compost, sometimes mixing that with sand. We like to use double shredded hardwood mulch that was touched on earlier. It's more cohesive, holds together better when your rain gardens are filling up and draining down. Again, planting with these deep-rooted native plants to help with that infiltration of runoff, stormwater runoff. You can design these into existing landscaping features, or you can have them looking messy, kind of however you want to do it. Jen talked a lot about designing those, so that can be really fun. And then just selecting different plants for different kinds of wildlife. So maybe you want to have more of a songbird rain garden or pollinator garden. Well, maybe you want to get some coneflowers that have really nice seed, or a cup plant where the birds will actually go in there and drink water out of the little leaves that cup around the stem. And here's actually a graphic. Hopefully you guys can see this of how rain gardens work. It's filling up with water, it's raining, and it's infiltrating down through the soil, 6-inch ponded water depth. So it's pretty cool. So just like a traditional flower garden, but able to absorb runoff and break down pollutants and pollinator habitat. So all of these beneficial things for just this one small scale 300 square foot rain garden. So here's another graphic too of where would you put a rain garden in this landscape. So you got water coming down the roof, out this downspout here, coming out of this downspout here. And then there's impervious green turf here. There's other impervious surfaces. So let's capture all that before it goes into the street and it picks up gunk, oil, leaves, things like that. And folks can be really creative in implementing these rain gardens. So dry creek beds, rain chains. The picture on the bottom left, that's actually a gutter going down slope and then outletting into a turret at the bottom of the hill. That's the bottom middle picture. Putting PVC pipe off of a patio, the bottom right. I have so many photos. I do like an hour plus presentation on rain gardens, but these are really fun. Here's some more examples of some completed rain gardens too. There's that bluethumb.org website that has lots of great examples on how to do them. Another example, this landowner went above and beyond and did a pollinator meadow around the rain garden there. Pollinator meadow, so this is essentially a seeding. Why mow your lawn and just save time and energy and convert all that to native habitat. So this is essentially converting the turf to a native seed mix. And we really like these pollinator pockets too. This is this matting material we use a lot. It's called this weed suppressant mat that is made by Mat Inc. out of Floodwood, Minnesota. And you're essentially doing some site prep either by killing the turf in different ways or removing it altogether, putting down some compost if needed and putting this weed suppressant mat on top, creating little holes in there and actually putting your native plants into those holes. The weed suppressant mat is biodegradable wood fiber and designed to biodegrade over 4 years, and it fills in with these native plants. The picture on the left is the lake walk, kind of when you're going down 61 towards Glensheen up the shore, and then just in another residential yard in Duluth. A lot of yards in Duluth, if you're driving around, you'll see this happening. Some other examples that we've helped landowners with these pollinator pockets. So some public spaces, private spaces, super fun, and then bee-lawns. And these can be easy or hard. A lot of folks will just kind of mow it really short when it's dry and go and seed with this bee-lawn mix to help boost up what's already there, or essentially just getting some clover and throwing your clover into bare sites. So it's kind of what you want to do here for your bee-lawn. Bowser has said that it's okay to use these bee-lawn mixes even though they're not native, because we like to use native plants in our restoration projects. So shorelines, I've been asked to talk about them quite a bit here because we do have a pretty great small scale buffer shoreline where somebody is just converting their mowed shoreline to a meadow or live planting. Or we could do full scale projects too, where we're actually grading, we're shaping, putting in coir logs using natural materials. So a lot of folks will reach out to us because they have erosion happening on their shoreline. And so our bread and butter is working with private landowners, and we can either reach them by doing targeted mailings or newsletters, articles in the paper, working with partners to just get the word out there that, hey, we're here to help. Hey, we have funding. So they might be reaching out to us because of erosion or habitat improvement, water quality. The lakes up here aren't too bad, but people really care about them, and they're trying to go above and beyond by putting in these buffers before water quality is actually a problem. I really like showing folks this picture. So the landowner on the right has been mowing all the way to the edge of their lawn, and the landowner on the left obviously wasn't. So it just shows that keeping those deep roots in place will help keep your shoreline in place. And that's essentially land that you're paying property taxes on, and you want to have that, so I just love showing that photo to folks. Bad quality, but it's pretty cool. Tells a story. And we also try to just promote a natural shoreline in general. So having shoreline vegetation, having emergent vegetation, drifted in logs and snags. And again, we just really try to promote a vegetated shoreline because they're relatively inexpensive. The plants filter out water, all kinds of flowers, attracts pollinators, takes up excess nutrients. This vegetation actually discourages geese, which can be a problem, especially for E. coli, but also just the public recreating. And then these natural shorelines are more of a permanent fix for erosion and for ice heaving and for these types of things that happen to shorelines that folks want to address. But these do take patience. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 years for these native plantings to get established. So I think the sayings sleep, creep, leap. First year they sleep, second year they creep, and third year they leap. That's more for seeding, but it also takes some patience for these live plants too. We really discourage using rock riprap because obviously it doesn't do a lot for infiltrating. It doesn't provide those benefits that those natural materials do. They tend to be more expensive. They don't filter pollutants out. But sometimes they are needed to combat really intense fetch or ice heaves, wave action. So we do use it in some cases. But we really like to use these coir logs if we can instead of rock riprap, where these are actually cut into the slope or graded into the slope and staked down, planted with native vegetation. They biodegrade over time and that really fill back in some of that shoreline that the landowner might have lost. So what we do is we'll go out for a site visit for free. We work for folks for free, and we will provide a conservation plan. And if folks want to go above and beyond, we'll do a survey, we'll do a design, we provide cost estimates, provide contractors for folks to reach out to, And if they'd like to, they can apply for funding through some of our programs. So typically for these shoreline projects, we'll help pay up to 75% of the cost. And this is just an example of a design program that we use to kind of sell conservation to folks. This is a shoreline that could have a buffer on it. This is called Real-Time Landscaping Architect. And again, native seed mixes, we really like to promote native seed mixes on these plantings, and sometimes in combination with live plant plugs. This is just a slide showing our native plant seed mix, our native plant kit and seed mix sale. We've been doing this for about 5 years. I helped get this going with MNL when I worked down at Scott Soil and Water, but we offer 9 different native plant kits that cover 150 square feet, 36 plants in each kit with 6 different species that bloom spring, summer, fall. And it's super awesome just to have that available to the public, to go to our website, order, and it's right there for them when they pick it up. They don't need to worry about going to find them. They don't need to worry about what plants to get. It's really, really fun. And we've restored over 300 acres since we started this program up here in Carlton. So here's some more examples of projects that we've helped landowners implement. Turf, managed mode, shoreline, and then we're doing a seeding, we're doing a blanket. So by the 3rd year, it looks pretty great. Eroding shoreline, this is a shadier site, so this is a shadier mix that we've done. There are some weeds in there, it's still becoming established, but 2nd year, but it's looking pretty good. Here's that weed suppressant mat, using it along a river. This is actually a project I helped my dad do down in the Mississippi River, down by Wabasha, for his consulting company. This is stabilizing the slope with coir logs. So you can see there's a big retaining wall, which we don't love, but we've buffered that down there with coir logs, seed, and a blanket there. Here's another example of a site with the coir logs, plants, seed that's becoming established. Here's the project that we did use rock riprap on. Again, this is what it looks like after. And here's another example of a recently installed shoreline restoration project. And I really like showing this project. This was done just in West Central Carlton County about 10 years ago. You can kind of see the coir log in there in the bottom where it's filled in with vegetation. And this was a restoration project, and it just looks so great. Like, this is in front of somebody's cabin. They still have a view. We've worked with the county so they can still have a view, but still have this natural space, and then the emergent vegetation too. We also talk with folks about maintenance. Maintenance is really important to have a successful project. And I will say, just backing up, when we're designing these projects, we are doing them based on usually on the Natural Resources Conservation Service technical standards. So they're a federal partner that we work with a lot. So these standards have been proven to work over time. And then we're also using the Board of Water and Soil Resources native vegetation and enhancement guidelines. So we're tapping into those a lot, plus Blue Thumb, Metro Blooms. And then this is, again, was covered in previous slides and in the previous presentations too, but we really want to save the stems for habitat for these little solitary bees. These photos were taken in a yard in Duluth, and just pretty cool to see the insects galleries, the little larvae and the little bees hanging out in there. Just the solitary mamas doing their thing. And this is kind of fun too, to see, you want to leave your petals. These little, leave the leaves, leave the petals. These little bees will go out there. These leafcutter bees will go and make these little nests with them, and it's pretty fun. And yeah, more again, just on nesting habitats. That was covered in previous presentations. I've already kind of talked about this before, but we do provide funding and cost share. Usually we'll ask folks to keep the conservation practice in place for 5 to 10 years, depending on what it is. But cost benefit, is it really there? We're not made of a ton of funding, but we really want to help fund projects if we can. And that's all I have for you folks. So thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
I've got a quick question for Jen. Jen, normally when I have folks asking about native vegetation or pollinators, and they want to do something, I quite often, honestly, I send them or direct them to the SWCD. So it's great to know that there's Metro Blooms out there and some other resources that they can turn to. And I think you mentioned a site assessment is kind of the place to start. I was curious, if that's the case, it'd be start with a site assessment. And is there a charge or fee for Metro Bloom's design and build to do a site assessment?
Hey, great. Thanks for that question. So a couple of things. One of the things we try to teach people to do is how to do a site assessment themselves, right? So we make sure that that's really accessible to them. So you all got the very condensed version of your presentation, which goes into a little bit more detail about how to do that. And yes, Metro Blooms does do site assessments, but of course we're pretty local. So we are based in Minneapolis and we work within about a 30-minute radius. And that's, and we do charge for that because we get a lot of requests and we don't have another funding source that would cover our time to do that. So on our Metro Blooms website, there's ways for folks to sign up for consultations. But again, those are, of course, local to the really, mostly in Hennepin County and some surrounding counties. But one of the things we try to do is really teach people how to look at it themselves, right? Over the course of a season, how to figure out how they're using their yard. What do they want to see in their yard? Do they want to leave space for kids or grandkids to play? But then also, they have all this extra turf that maybe they don't need to mow. We always say if you're only utilizing your turf to walk on it to mow it, then maybe you don't need quite so much. So there's some good things to get people to think about kind of with the site assessments themselves as well. Does that answer your question here?
Yes, thank you.
Hey, and Carlton is doing all kinds of great stuff. I appreciated those examples Alyssa was giving, and especially you were talking about that people could go online and order your starter packs almost, which I haven't heard of other SWCs doing that. And you said you started that like 5 years ago?
Yeah, super excited to talk about this. So this is through MNL, formerly called Minnesota Native Landscapes out of Otsego. They have the Community Habitat Partnership Program. And I helped MNL work on doing this back when I worked at Scott. So that was a while ago. It's really excellent program to work for MNL to partner with WMOs, watershed management organizations, counties, SWCDs. They already have these prepackaged kits that you can have kind of available through your own program, and you have an open length of time where landowners are going onto your website and ordering these kits, and then MNL will actually deliver the kits and seed mixes to you on seed pickup day. So we've turned it actually into this big event where we have booths, we have food trucks, we have kids activities, and it's so much fun. The community really looks forward to it. We actually have folks from the cities come up and pick up kits from us. We have folks from the Iron Range all the way up to Cook, even from Wisconsin. So yeah, just really trying to make it easy for folks to get a tray of plants with different species in it, ranging towards like what's their goal. So we have a shoreline kit, we have a rain garden kit, a buckthorn replacement kit, we have a shady kit, a pine mulch kit. And we can change that throughout the year. So like next year, we're going to add a sandy kit. We're going to offer some other different kits just so, because we have repeat customers and we want to give them variety to keep adding to their lawn too. So yeah, it's really fun.
Great. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's very cool. And there's other resources on our website, on our training and education site. Just want to say thanks to everyone for attending and hope to see you next month.